Iran just unveiled a missile which can reach the US, and they've actually threatened to use it. Iran said, quote, "Our latest ballistic missile is almost ready for service and it can reach targets 10,000 kilometers away." Now you need to know though, Iran already has missiles which can travel into parts of Europe. They can travel 6,000 kilometers. And so because of that, it's not entirely impossible to believe that Iran might have created one which can reach the US mainland. That would be a huge deal. Obviously a few months ago, the US carried out huge airstrikes onto Iran's nuclear facilities. And at the time when the US did that, Iran had no way of defending themselves and attacking back, except if they had this missile, it's possible Iran would have been able to launch it at the US. You should know though, something a little bit unusual, this hasn't been completely independently verified yet, so we don't know if it's true. As you'd expect though, the West hasn't commented on it, which would suggest that it might be true. They usually would just say Iran is lying. So if Iran is telling the truth, for the first time, Iran will have a way of attacking the US directly, which is a huge deal. But to be fair, Iran might not have to even do that, because America just announced they're building a military base in Syria for the first time in decades. Syria said, quote, "Work is underway within the framework of a joint political and military coordination." But you need to know that this is actually meant to be a secret. It doesn't seem like we're meant to know about this. In fact, the only reason we know about this is because of two Western officials and a Syrian defense official who confirmed that it was true in secret. But as well as that, something worth knowing, as soon as the report was published, the Syrian Defense Ministry actually released a statement on it, and they called it, quote, "false." And so you need to know the reason why the US and Syria would want to keep this a secret and not just tell the world. Obviously, the US wouldn't want to tell their people they're building another military base in the Middle East. It's a big risk, and having troops there could be attacked. And Syria wouldn't want their people knowing that they're bringing the US back into the country. Obviously, the US went to war in Syria and killed hundreds of thousands of people. Regardless of that though, the Syrian president is visiting the White House tomorrow, meeting with Trump. At the same time, we've got this report that the US is building a military base in Syria now. Really quite a big deal. However, the US's involvement in the Middle East doesn't just stop there. And that's because the US has just been exposed like we've never seen before. For the first time, the US has admitted that they were behind Israel's first attack on Iran back in June. And what's important is at the time, the US denied having anything to do with that attack. They actually condemned it. When Israel carried out that first attack on Iran back on June the 13th, the US released a statement. They said, quote, "Tonight, Israel took action against Iran, and we are not involved in these strikes against Iran. Our top priority is protecting American troops in the region." However, today, almost 6 months after that happened, for the first time, the US has admitted that they were actually behind the attack, like they said they weren't. Trump said, quote, "Israel attacked Iran first, and that attack was very, very powerful, and I was very much in charge of that attack." That's completely the opposite of what the US said at the time, but I've got to be honest, it seems like Trump forgot what they said, and he didn't mean to say this. This really isn't a good look for the US, because at the time, Iran said if they ever found out the US was behind these attacks on their country, then Iran would use it as an act of war. And the US has hundreds of military bases in the Middle East. They've got thousands of troops there, and these troops could easily have come under attack if Iran found out the US was behind it. Regardless of that though, the US has admitted that they were behind Israel's first attack on Iran, which started that 12-day war between them, which killed hundreds of people. But sticking on Israel, forget about the US. Turkey just issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Turkey said, quote, "Netanyahu is responsible for genocide and crimes against humanity." But you need to know, Netanyahu is just one of 37 Israeli officials that Turkey has issued these arrest warrants for. But Israel responded to it. They said, quote, "Israel firmly rejects the latest PR stunt by the tyrant President Erdogan." But it seems Turkey is serious about this, and they will actually try to arrest Netanyahu if they can. They said, quote, "Back in March, Israel bombed the Turkish-Palestinian Friendship Hospital built by us." And at the same time, Turkey said when Israel bombed this hospital, which Turkey built, by the way, they killed nearly 500 people in Gaza. But some of the other people, as well as Netanyahu, who Turkey has issued these arrest warrants for, are the Defense Minister Israel Katz, along with the National Security Minister Ben Gvir. And kind of ironically, this comes almost a year after the International Criminal Court did the same thing and issued an arrest warrant for them as well. Obviously, nobody's been arrested so far because of that, but maybe because of this new arrest warrant by Turkey, things could change a bit. Already though, Turkey has ended diplomatic relations with Israel, trade with Israel. They've even threatened to invade Israel to stop the war on Gaza. So really, this is quite a big deal. But something you need to know, which is really interesting, is that Venezuela just said that they've been building weapons decoys to confuse the US, so that the US doesn't know what to attack if they decide to attack Venezuela. Today, Venezuela released a video, and they said, quote, "Our weapons decoys are to counter American intelligence and surveillance. At the moment, if you don't know, the US is flying loads of drones over Venezuela to gather intelligence on what capabilities Venezuela has militarily, along with what weapons they have and missiles, etc. But today, Venezuela announced the US has done that for nothing because it's all been a lie. They've been gathering intelligence on weapons decoys. But as well as that, it will mean that if the US decides to attack Venezuela, then the US won't actually know what to attack because they won't know whether they're attacking a real weapon or a fake weapon decoy. But something really interesting, back in World War II, the Allies, specifically the British and the Americans, did the same thing when they were preparing for D-Day. So the US has their own experience in doing this. The British and the Americans built an entire fake army in Dover to convince the Germans that the attack was coming in Calais. But really, the real army was further south in England and they were hidden because the real attack, as you should know, came in Normandy. So because of the weapons decoys, the Germans were distracted and D-Day worked. So really, Venezuela has just taken inspiration from the US, what they did a few decades ago. But Venezuela isn't the only ones taking inspiration from the US, because today, China unveiled their largest ever aircraft carrier, and they said, quote, "This is the most powerful aircraft carrier we've ever built." And you need to know, today China officially launched this aircraft carrier, so this isn't just a project and it's not being made. This is actually sailing now. But something important to know, where China has seemingly taken inspiration from the US from is because they've now got electromagnetic catapults on this aircraft carrier. In fact, that was something we thought only the US had access to, and they only have it on their very best aircraft carriers. But regardless of that, China's now got it, which means they'll be able to launch far more dangerous and far heavier aircraft from this aircraft carrier. In fact, according to reports, this aircraft carrier might even be able to launch China's world's first 6th generation fighter jet from it soon, once it's officially flying in their air force. China said, quote, "At the rate we're going, in 20 years' time, we will have a world-class naval force, far better than that of the US." And this aircraft carrier can already launch the Chinese J-35 and J-15, which are some of China's best fighter jets. So China is not only really advancing, but they're actually catching up to the US, at least that's what they say. But to be honest, it looks like they are. But anyway, this was my daily news recap where I summarized most important news just from the last 24 hours, so hopefully you learned something. But something important, yesterday the UK bombed Syria, so click here to watch that video and click here to subscribe so that you can see the next daily recap tomorrow.